And welcome back. Joining me now to talk about the legislative session, week one, already in the books, new Senate Majority Leader Erin Murphy and Senate Minority Leader Mark Johnson. Thank you both for being here. First of all, Senator Murphy, let me start with you. I was very heartened to see that Kerry Dietzick, who you just replaced, has been appointed chair of a committee. I know she's battling health issues, but it's good to see she's going to be engaged.
She is engaged, and I think all of us in the Senate were really happy to know that she was going to take on the role of being the chair of State, Local Government, and Veterans. She has been working right along, and I had a chance to talk with her last night. Her voice is clear and strong, but as you would expect, Leader Dietzick has continued to work. She is representing the district where she's been elected from, and she's going to continue to bring her hardworking leadership to the Minnesota Senate.
And she is a good voice to have at the state capitol. So we're glad that that she's going to be engaged in the session while she continues her health battles. Senator Johnson, in the Senate, you guys are under quite the same electoral pressure as they are in the House, where they've got an election coming up in November. Does that change anything about how you will govern in the Senate?
And what I hope that opens up the opportunity for maybe more bipartisan work. You know, we're not trying to constantly contrast between the policy differences. We want to make sure that our voices are being heard there as well. So hopefully they're not constantly trying to block us out of the conversation going forward.
And another reason why in the Senate you have to be a little more bipartisan, the razor-thin one-vote majority. You can only afford to lose one vote on any issue, and there are some issues, like sports betting, for instance, where there's Republicans and Democrats on both sides. So your thoughts about that?
So one of the things that we learned last year under the leadership of Kerry Dietzick is that if we act together and stick together, we can make important changes to improve the lives of Minnesotans. And often we will talk about the 34 votes, but what I've seen in my experience in the Minnesota Senate is there is a tendency to work together. And while you may not see lots and lots of bipartisan votes on the floor, inside the bills that we're taking up are the fingerprints and the work of Democrats and Republicans in the committee process, in that hearing process, in amendments, in behind-the-scenes work that are shaping the policies that come to the floor and for a vote.
Let me ask you about one controversial issue that was introduced last week, the idea of making Minnesota a sanctuary state for undocumented immigrants. Speaker Hortman said that she doesn't think there's the votes for it. There's too many unknowns about the bill. You said, let's let the process play out. Are there some differences between the Senate and House on that issue?
Nope, I don't think there are differences between the Senate and the House. We approach issues through the lens of a committee process. That's how bills are heard. And it is not a brand new idea that Senator Fateh is bringing forward to us. It'll be up to the committees to decide whether they're going to hear that legislation or not. But what Senator Fateh is really asking is what kind of state are we in Minnesota? Should we be welcoming people to the state of Minnesota from wherever they come? And I think that's a fair question for us. We want more people to come to the state of Minnesota.
And Senator Johnson, I know you're opposed to that bill very vociferously, you and most Republicans who think it's government's job to enforce the laws as well as make laws.
Yeah, and so now we are working against our federal partners through that bill, no longer cooperating on federal law, which is just the wrong approach to this. This clearly needs to be something that happens at the federal level. We should be encouraging and helping, bringing those ideas forward instead of putting our residents at jeopardy, our budgets, our school district, our communities. We're going to be paying a lot of money to do that. The timing of this, that the Democrats bring this forward now, just seems to be very ill-conceived.
Because there are concerns about what kind of a burden that might put on healthcare agencies, schools, and the like, not to mention law enforcement.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that, like nursing and educators, we have a shortage of law enforcement officers in the state of Minnesota, state troopers, law enforcement in our communities across the state. We want them doing the work that we've asked them to do here in the state of Minnesota and not adding new responsibilities to them. There is federal law. There are federal enforcement efforts that should be upheld. But I don't think we should ask Minnesota's law enforcement officers who are already working under tremendous pressure because of shortages to take on extra work. So, you know, I think that, like I said earlier, this is a bill that Senator Fateh's offered. I don't know that it'll be heard. Senator Hortman's made their position clear.
All right, we'll be keeping an eye on that issue. Sports betting is another one. Again, as I mentioned before, Republicans, Democrats for and against it. But it is one of the things our polling shows 55 to 60% of Minnesotans routinely say, yes, approve sports betting. But then there's the added layer of, is it just the Native American tribes who are going to be running this, or are the horse tracks going to be involved? Where do you stand from a Republican perspective?
So again, we've got both sides of our caucus, pro and against the issue, but it really comes down to what does that package look like. I think we could pass it if we get the right players moving again, with the tribes and the tracks and local charities and the state tax revenue issue. If we can get that lined up, it could pass. Otherwise, the path is pretty difficult.
Will it be possible for Democrats to approve something that is not tribes only in terms of running the sports betting?
So Senator Klein has been leading this issue in the Minnesota Senate for the last couple of years, and he's continued to do a tremendous amount of work working with a variety of stakeholders, including our tribal nations. I think there are Democrats that support it, there are Republicans that support it, and there's some opposition, but he's been working closely with Senator Marty. I think the bill is going to be heard again, perhaps in his committee, in the Committee on Commerce, to get those last pieces put into place to see if it has the votes to pass.
And final thing, it's a so-called bonding bill year, state building projects. It needs 2/3 majority, which means it needs Republican votes. Where do you stand on an amount of a bonding bill?
Well, that's really dependent on what the February forecast looks like and what we're able to spend on a bonding bill. The debt service on that is going to be pretty significant, and we're getting up close to that debt service limit in the state. So we have to be very, very careful on what that bonding bill looks like.
Likely around $1 billion. Is that your best guess?
That or maybe just a little less than that. Of course, we did a historic level of bonding in the last session, and Sandy Pappas and others have been across the state to make sure that we understand where are the best options for us to do the investment in our infrastructure. That's our responsibility. Our roads, bridges, water, higher education institutions, we're responsible for the upkeep. That's what the purpose of capital investment is, and we will make progress on that this year.
And I know the next budget forecast, I believe, comes out February 28th. We'll get a lot more clarity on what is possible to do in the legislature. Thank you both for being here. I hope to visit with you again back here in the studio later in the session when we see how things are going.